Well, joining us now is Pyotr Kursin. He's a former UN official and geopolitical expert. Now, Xi Jinping has hosted both Trump and Putin. He may soon meet Kim Jong Un. What message do you think China is trying to send by positioning itself at the center of all of these global power relationships?
Well, it's nice to be with you. I think it's always interesting to try to understand what's going through the head of someone like Xi Jinping, Putin, Trump. These are what we might call strongmen, people who have a capacity to lead over a more centralized form of government, or in the case of Trump, an aspiring one. I think that Xi Jinping, it all largely stems back to his idea of the national rejuvenation, this idea that China needs to restore its glory after the century of humiliation. And Xi Jinping is someone who grew very much up in a time under Mao Zedong and the Great Leap Forward, and he saw China in a very difficult phase. And I think that significantly influenced his upbringing. His father worked in the government, and he has been someone who has worked very pedantically to assert China's interests in a way that Hu Jintao and his predecessors didn't. And in this case, hosting Putin and Trump demonstrates that China can hang out with everybody. I think we should always put a bit of a caveat that these meetings happened because there were respective delays in their own ways, but China didn't have to do this at the same time. The fact that Putin and Xi met and was arranged on May 20th, which is a date carrying the homophobic meaning of "I love you" in Chinese, is a very deliberate intention. And I think a clear demonstration that Xi hung out with Trump, but he wanted to see Putin, if that makes sense. And I can certainly guarantee that those two were discussing Xi's experience with Trump and how to handle him, manipulate him, and so on. So it's certainly an important past couple of weeks for Beijing.
Now, I want to talk more about North Korea. North Korea has recently amended their constitution. They removed any mention of reunification with South Korea. What does that signal to you, and how would that impact the way in which Beijing and Kim Jong Un could ultimately carry out this type of meeting?
It's interesting. North Korea is, Kim Jong Un likes to be seen as in the spotlight, right? We could see his efforts to be relevant in the global system, in the global community in the past. And it's certainly weird to not have any mention or consideration of North Korea, considering how fragmented and chaotic the world is, with everything happening in it with Iran and Ukraine and so on. So certainly in this meeting, it would be interesting to see how Kim Jong Un acts, just given that the attention has been so, the spotlight hasn't been on North Korea. So I think that that's one thing, is just to see how he behaves, period. But there's a bit of a nuance before I get to China specifically, which is that the Russian-North Korean relationship has deepened incredibly quickly and intensely in the past couple of years. North Koreans are very much involved with the Russian war. The Russians tried a long time to deny that this was the case, and then it was overtly apparent that 10,000 North Korean troops were helping, not just in sort of, symbolic senses or logistical senses, but literally on the front lines in Kursk, when the Ukrainians took a large piece of territory in that province, oblast of Russia. So the point with this is that China never really liked this relationship. China is a status quo power. Some people argue that it benefits from the international system as it is, albeit trying to amend it a little bit to undermine US hegemonic status. But it's not as reckless or disruptive as the North Koreans or the Russians. And so China didn't really welcome this relationship. And so when it comes to this Article 2, which is how North Korea defines territory, it's basically a huge and I think underreported shift in the way that North Korea is looking at reunification with North Korea. And that's a problem for China, because China doesn't want the spotlight. It doesn't want disruption on its new report. It's got its own domestic issues, but of course, the remnants of Iran, Russia, and the global economic fallout from these events, which China is working hard to try to stabilize for its own interests. But of course, if North Korea becomes a problem, then it's another headache for Xi Jinping.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you, Pyotr, so much for joining us and giving us your insight. Fascinating. We're going to have to wait and see if this meeting actually comes to fruition. But we're going to be turning